I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to doubt her husband. I believed in love, in trust, in the kind of bond that didn't need to be questioned. But all of that shattered on a quiet Thursday evening, with one small damning detail: a faint red smudge on the collar of his gray workout hoodie. "Is that lipstick?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat as I stared at the stain like it was a wound on my own body. Ethan looked down, his eyes narrowing for a split second before he gave me that disarming grin, the one that used to melt away all my doubts. "Babe, come on. It's probably from someone brushing past me at the gym. Those locker rooms get crowded sometimes." My chest tightened. "You're sure?" "Of course I'm sure," he said, walking over and planting a kiss on my forehead. "Don't tell me you're going to get jealous over a stain." His laugh was light, casual, like I was being silly. But something in me twisted. I forced a smile, nodding as if I believed him, but that night I lay awake next to him, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The next day I found myself scrolling through the website of his gym, Ridgeview Fitness Center, my thumb hovering over the sign-up button. My heart pounded in my chest as I debated. Was I being paranoid? Was I letting one small stain drive me to insanity? But every time I closed my eyes I saw that red mark. I hit the button. A week later, I stood in front of the large glass doors of Ridgeview Fitness Center. It was a sleek, modern building with bright LED lights and walls covered in motivational quotes like, "Don't stop when you're tired, stop when you're done." I checked in at the front desk, feeling the weight of nerves pressing down on my shoulders. My excuse was simple. I wanted to get in shape too. Ethan had encouraged it when I told him. "That's great, babe. We'll motivate each other," he had said with a grin. If only he knew my real reason. The plan was simple. Blend in. Observe. Find out if my gut feeling was wrong, if I was wrong. I didn't want to be right. God, I prayed I was wrong. For the first week I stuck to a simple routine: treadmill, elliptical, weights. I kept my eyes on Ethan whenever I could without being too obvious. Most of the time he looked like he was working out. He'd lift weights, wipe his brow with a towel, drink from his water bottle. It all seemed perfectly normal. But there was one detail that didn't sit right with me. Every session at around 7:45 p.m., Ethan would disappear.
No stretching. No cool down.
Just gone. I'd glance around, pretending to be lost in my workout, but I could never find him. The men's locker room? Maybe. But it never took him long to shower, because by the time I left at 8:15, he'd already be waiting for me at home. Something wasn't adding up. On the second week I decided to switch my routine. No more treadmills. No more weights. I'd hang around closer to the locker rooms, pretending to stretch or wipe down equipment while keeping my eyes peeled. It was during one of these stakeouts that I saw it. Ethan wasn't in the locker room. He was walking down the back hallway, the one that led to the sauna. But he wasn't alone. A woman was with him. She was tall, blonde, with legs that seemed to go on forever. Her hair was tied in a high ponytail, and she wore one of those sleek black two-piece workout sets that looked more like a fashion statement than gym wear. They didn't look at each other as they walked, but their pace was synchronized, as if they'd done this 100 times before. My heart felt like it had been caught in a vice. I followed, careful to stay at a distance. They reached the sauna door. Ethan glanced down the hall, his eyes darting left, then right, and for a moment I swore he looked right at me. I ducked behind a pillar, my heart hammering in my ears. When I peeked out again, they were gone. The door to the sauna was closed. I felt a wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to lean against the wall to steady myself. My breathing was shallow, and my head spun with every horrible possibility. My mind screamed at me to burst in, to confront him, to drag him out in front of the whole gym. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, frozen in place, staring at that door like it held every answer I'd been searching for. Time felt like it stretched forever, but in reality it was only 20 minutes. When the door finally opened, steam billowed out, clouding the air like some kind of cinematic fog. They stepped out together. Ethan's hair was damp, beads of water clinging to his skin, his shirt clinging to his body like he'd just run a marathon. Her face was flushed, her eyes half-lidded, and she laughed softly at something he said. I felt a burn in my chest that was deeper than jealousy. It was betrayal. I watched as they walked down the hall, still not touching, still not looking at each other. But their connection was undeniable. People who had nothing to hide didn't move like that. People who had nothing to hide didn't check hallways before going into a sauna together. I left the gym early that day. I drove home with shaking hands, my grip on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream, but the pain was too sharp, too raw. That night, Ethan came home like nothing had happened. He kissed me on the cheek, asked me how my workout was, and I stared at him like he was a stranger. Good, I said, my voice hollow. It was good. He didn't even notice the crack in my voice. The next night I followed him again. Same routine. Same time. Same hallway. But this time I didn't stay behind the pillar. I walked right up to the sauna door and pressed my ear against it. I could hear muffled voices, soft laughter. My stomach churned. My heart told me to turn around, to leave, to pretend I didn't know what I knew. But I was done pretending. I opened the door. Steam poured out, hot and wet against my face. I squinted through the haze, searching for them. And there they were. Ethan was sitting on the wooden bench, leaning back, his arms draped across it like he was king of the world. She was next to him, so close their legs touched. Her head tilted toward him as she whispered something in his ear. They both turned to look at me at the same time. The shock on Ethan's face was instant, his eyes wide with panic, his body jerking upright like he'd been electrocuted. Her face, however, didn't flinch. She looked at me with mild interest, like she was evaluating me, wondering what I'd do next. For a moment none of us moved. The only sound was the soft hiss of steam filling the air. "Hey babe," Ethan said, his voice cracking as he stood up, his hands raised like I was pointing a gun at him. This isn't what it looks like." I laughed. It was short, sharp, bitter. I didn't even recognize the sound coming from my own mouth. "Isn't it?" I asked, my eyes locking on his, daring him to lie to me again. "Then tell me, Ethan. What is it?" He stammered, searching for words that wouldn't come. The blonde woman leaned back against the bench, her eyes fixed on me with a small, knowing smile. She didn't care. She had nothing to lose. But Ethan did. I stepped inside, letting the door close behind me, trapping us all in that suffocating heat. "Go ahead, Ethan," I said softly, walking toward him, slow, deliberate, feeling the weight of every step. "Explain it to me." And for the first time I saw it, the way his confidence crumbled, the way his mask of lies finally cracked. He had nowhere to run. And I wasn't going anywhere. Ethan's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape. His hands were still raised, palms out, as if that would somehow convince me of his innocence. The blonde woman didn't even bother to move. She leaned back on the bench, stretching her long legs out in front of her like she was basking in the heat, completely unfazed by my presence. That look on her face, smug, calm, like she had nothing to lose, made my blood boil. "Rebecca, listen," Ethan started, his voice shaky like a teenager caught sneaking out past curfew. "This isn't what you think. I was just—" "Stop," I said, my voice low but sharp, cutting through the thick air of the sauna. It was so hot in there, the steam clinging to my skin, making my clothes stick to me like a second layer of flesh. But I didn't feel it. I didn't feel anything except the rage building in my chest. "Don't you dare insult me with more lies." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I took another step forward, eyes locked on him, daring him to try. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was about to burst through my ribs, but I didn't show it. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. "You said it was just the gym," I hissed, my eyes narrowing as I tilted my head toward the blonde. "This is your workout, huh? Is this your cardio session? Sweating it out in the sauna with her?" I pointed at the woman, who finally raised an eyebrow, a slow, deliberate motion like she was impressed. "Relax, sweetheart," the woman said, her voice smooth like honey, her southern accent curling around each word. "Ain't no need to get dramatic. If he's yours, keep him on a shorter leash." Her words hit me like a slap, sharp and stinging, but I didn't flinch. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. I turned my gaze back to Ethan, my eyes boring into him like twin drills. "Is that how it is, Ethan?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. "Is that what you want? Some woman who thinks it's cute to wreck someone else's home?" My voice cracked on the last word, and I hated myself for it. Hated that I was letting him see how much he'd broken me. "Babe, please," Ethan said, stepping forward, his hands out like he was approaching a wild animal. "It's not like that. It's nothing. I swear. Nothing." My voice exploded before I could stop it. The walls of the sauna echoed with it, and I saw him flinch. You call this nothing? I jabbed a finger toward the two of them. All those nights you said you were working on yourself, getting stronger, being a better man. This is what you were doing. He looked down at his feet like a child caught in a lie. I didn't mean for it to. Don't you dare say it just happened, Ethan, I snapped, stepping so close I could see the droplets of sweat on his face, see his eyes flickering with panic. People don't just trip and fall into someone else's arms. You chose this. My voice cracked again, but I pressed on. You chose to sneak around, to lie to my face, to make me feel like I was crazy for questioning you. He shook his head, wiping his hands over his face like he could somehow erase the mess he'd made. I didn't want to hurt you. Don't give me that. I spat, the anger burning hotter than the sauna itself. My whole body was trembling now, but I didn't back down. If you didn't want to hurt me, you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't have done any of this. So spare me the "I didn't want to hurt you" speech. Silence settled in the room, broken only by the hiss of steam and the soft drip of condensation running down the wooden walls. Ethan looked at me, his mouth half open like he had something else to say, but no words came. There were no words that could fix this. The blonde finally stood up, slowly, lazily, like she had all the time in the world. She brushed her hands down her thighs, smoothing out invisible wrinkles on her leggings, and then looked me dead in the eyes. Men are simple, honey, she said with a shrug. Her voice was light, as if she were offering me friendly advice. You can scream all you want, but at the end of the day he's only gonna do what he wants. She smiled, that sly, poisonous smile that made me want to grab her by the hair and drag her out of the room. But I didn't. I smiled back. Not because I thought she was right, but because I knew something she didn't. You think you've won, don't you? I said, tilting my head, mirroring her smug expression. You think because you've got him sneaking into saunas with you that somehow makes you special? I took a step forward, closing the space between us until we were only inches apart. My voice dropped to a whisper, low and sharp as a blade. You're not special. You're temporary. Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing into slits. I turned back to Ethan, my chest heaving as the weight of it all settled in. This was it. The moment where everything broke. I could feel it splintering inside me, sharp, jagged pieces cutting through every part of me. But I didn't cry. Not in front of him. You know what, Ethan? I said, my voice steady now, sharp as glass. You can have her. Both of you deserve each other. Babe, wait. He reached for my arm, but I yanked it away like his touch burned me. No, I said firmly, looking him dead in the eyes. I'm done waiting. I'm done forgiving. I'm done being the one who cares more than you do. I leaned in just close enough for him to see the tears welling up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. When you walk out of here, you'll realize what you lost. And by then it'll be too late. He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't care what he had to say. I spun on my heel, the heat of the sauna pressing against my back like flames licking at my skin. But I didn't feel it. I felt nothing. As I walked down that long hallway, the world around me blurred. My heart was racing, my ears ringing with the echoes of everything I just said. Every ounce of pain and rage that had finally spilled out of me. It felt like I was floating, like my feet weren't even touching the ground. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. The cold air of the gym lobby hit me like a slap, shocking my senses back to reality. My vision sharpened, and I blinked away the fog that had settled in my mind. I walked straight to the front desk. Cancel my membership, I said, my voice steady, clear. The receptionist, a young guy with headphones hanging around his neck, glanced up from his computer. Sure, ma'am. Can I ask why? I turned my head just slightly, looking at the hallway behind me, that long, endless corridor leading back to the sauna. Because I don't train with cheaters, I said, my voice flat and cold. The receptionist nodded slowly, typing into the computer. Got it. Cancelled. Take care, ma'am. I walked out of Ridgeview Fitness Center that night with nothing but my keys and my pride intact. The cold night air wrapped around me, fresh and sharp, like I'd just come up for air after drowning for too long. I sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, letting the silence wash over me. No music.
No tears.
Just silence. I didn't know what would happen tomorrow or the next day or the next. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to be that woman anymore. The one who doubts herself. The one who waits for explanations that never come. The one who hopes that maybe somehow things will get better. No, I was done with that. I took one last glance at the gym, the lights glowing behind the glass like a fishbowl full of strangers. Somewhere inside, Ethan was probably pacing, thinking of a way to explain it all to me. But I was already gone. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. My breath fogged up the windshield, blurring the bright neon glow of Ridgeview Fitness Center in the distance. My mind was racing, but my heart felt numb. Not broken, not yet. Just numb, like my body was protecting me from feeling the full force of it all. I replayed every moment in my head, every excuse Ethan had ever given me, every little white lie I'd brushed off. How many times had he come home exhausted from the gym, throwing his sweaty clothes in the laundry like it was no big deal? How many times had I kissed him on the cheek, telling him I was proud of him for taking care of himself? God, I felt so stupid. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, letting out a slow, shaky breath. My eyes burned with the threat of tears, but I clenched them shut, refusing to let a single drop fall. Not for him. Not for someone who didn't deserve it. My phone buzzed in the passenger seat. I glanced over, my heart clenching as Ethan's name lit up the screen. The text read, "Babe, come back. We need to talk. Please." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. Part of me wanted to reply, to give him one last chance to explain himself. But I knew what he would say. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. "You're the one I love." I'd heard those lines before. Maybe not from him, but from stories my friends had told me, from movies, from every tale of infidelity I'd ever heard. It was always the same script. Always. Another buzz. "Please, Rebecca. I'm sorry. Just come home. We can fix this." Fix this. Like it was a broken chair, something you could glue back together if you just tried hard enough. But some things couldn't be fixed. Some things needed to be thrown away. I turned off my phone. The silence that followed was deafening.
No buzzing. No pleading.
Just the hum of the car engine and the soft sound of rain starting to tap against the roof. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the patter of rain drown out the noise in my head. For the first time in hours, I felt something other than rage or numbness. I felt free. The next few days were a blur. I didn't speak to Ethan. I didn't answer his texts or calls. He came home each night trying to act normal, like he could will everything back to the way it was if he just pretended hard enough. He'd come up behind me in the kitchen, hands on my waist, whispering, "I love you, babe." Like those words still meant something. But I didn't respond. I didn't smile. I didn't even flinch. I was already gone. On the third day, I woke up before him, quietly packing a suitcase while he snored softly in the bed we used to share. I didn't slam drawers or bang around the room like some woman in a TV drama. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than any argument we could have had. I zipped up the suitcase, took one last look at him. His face so peaceful, like he had nothing to worry about. For a moment I wondered if he knew I was leaving. If he had felt it the same way I had felt his betrayal. But I didn't stay to find out. I walked out of that house with only the things I truly needed. Clothes. Documents. My dignity. Everything else could stay behind. Along with the lies and broken promises. I didn't need them. I stayed with my sister for a while. Kayla didn't ask too many questions, but I could tell she knew something was wrong. The second I walked through her front door with that suitcase, she just hugged me. No words, no prying, just warmth. I didn't cry then either. I think I was still too angry to cry. At night though, when it was just me and the ceiling, the tears came. Slow at first, like a drip from a leaky faucet. Then all at once like a dam breaking. I sobbed so hard my chest ached, my breath coming out in short, sharp gasps. I clutched the pillow to my face, muffling the sound so Kayla wouldn't hear me. I cried for the woman I had been, the one who believed in love and loyalty. I cried for every time I defended Ethan to my friends, telling them he was a good man. I cried for every night I spent waiting for him to come home from his workouts, thinking he was doing something to make us better, not knowing he was out there ruining it all. But most of all I cried for myself. Not the woman I was, but the woman I was becoming. Weeks passed. Ethan's calls went from constant to occasional to non-existent. I guess he realized I wasn't coming back. I'd filed for separation, and the paperwork sat in my email, waiting for his signature. I didn't care if he signed it or not. My decision was made. One night, Kayla and I were watching some cheesy rom-com on the couch, a half-eaten bowl of popcorn between us. I wasn't paying attention to the movie. My eyes were on the screen, but my mind was miles away. You know, Kayla said, nudging me with her elbow, you're handling this better than I thought you would. I snorted. Am I? Yeah, she said, tossing a piece of popcorn into her mouth. Most people would have gone full revenge mode. Burned his clothes, slashed his tires. Something dramatic like that. I thought about it, I admitted, and she burst out laughing. I smiled too, the first real smile I'd had in weeks. You're better than that, she said, giving me a look like she was proud of me. Yeah, I said, leaning back against the couch cushion. I am. 3 months later, I was scrolling through social media when I saw it. A photo. Ethan. Smiling. Arms wrapped around her. The blonde from the sauna. They were at some lake, the sun setting behind them. His face pressed against hers like he'd never hurt a soul in his life. The caption read, "Happiness is finding someone who sees the real you." I stared at that photo for a long time. My heart didn't ache like it used to. It didn't burn or twist. I felt nothing. If anything, I almost laughed. The real you, huh? Well, I had seen the real Ethan and I wasn't impressed. I tapped on the comments, scrolling through all the "so happy for you" and "you two look so good together" comments from people who didn't know the truth. I hovered over the comment button, debating whether I should say something, but I didn't. I closed the app, tossed my phone onto the couch and leaned back with a sigh. There was nothing I needed to say. The truth had already been spoken. The woman in that photo could have him. She could deal with the sneaking, the excuses, the lipstick stains. She could have it all. I had my peace. I stood up, walked over to the window and looked outside at the world I'd almost missed. The sky was pink and gold with the setting sun, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the world was big again. Full of possibilities. Full of places to go, people to meet, and moments to live. I didn't feel trapped anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was free. And sometimes, freedom doesn't come with fireworks or grand cinematic moments. Sometimes it's as simple as standing by a window watching the sun set, knowing you're not waiting for anyone to come home. I smiled to myself, soft but real. This time I was the one who had walked away. And I wasn't going back. A week later I found myself sitting in a small coffee shop downtown, a warm cup of vanilla latte in my hands. The hum of conversation filled the air, a soft, constant buzz of strangers talking about their lives, work, love, weekend plans. It was the kind of noise that used to make me feel lonely, but not anymore. I stared out the large window watching people pass by on the street. Businessmen in sharp suits, teenagers with headphones in, a mom pushing a stroller while juggling a phone call. Ordinary people living ordinary lives. I envied them once. I used to look at couples walking hand in hand and wonder if they knew how lucky they were. But now I knew better. Not every hand you hold is worth holding on to. Room for one more? I blinked and turned my head to see a man standing next to my table, a kind smile on his face. He was tall, with tousled brown hair and warm hazel eyes. He wore a dark green jacket and jeans, casual but put together. I glanced around thinking maybe he was talking to someone else, but no. His eyes were on me. Sure, I said, a little caught off guard. I moved my purse off the chair in front of me, and he slid into it with an easy grin. Thanks, he said, setting down a cup of black coffee and a notebook that looked well worn, the pages frayed at the edges. I raised an eyebrow. You always sit with strangers? Only the ones who look like they're deep in thought, he replied, tapping his pen against the notebook. Figured you might be writing something interesting. And I'm always on the lookout for a good story. I couldn't help but laugh. A short, sharp sound that felt strange but good. Well, I hate to disappoint you, but I'm not writing a story. No. He tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to figure out. Then what's got you looking like you're halfway between solving a mystery and burning down a building? His words caught me off guard. It was oddly specific and somehow exactly right. Maybe I'm doing both. I said with a sly smile, taking a sip of my latte. He laughed, low and genuine, and I found myself smiling back. I hadn't smiled like that in a while. Not the polite, "I'm fine" smile I've been giving everyone for the past few months. This one felt different. Real. "I'm Jake, by the way," he said, offering his hand. "Rebecca," I replied, shaking it firmly. "Nice to meet you, Rebecca," he said, leaning forward a bit, resting his arms on the table. "So tell me, which part of your life are you about to set on fire?" The question lingered between us for a moment, and I glanced down at my coffee, swirling it in my hands like it held the answer. I could have brushed him off, told him it was nothing, but for some reason I didn't want to lie. "Not my life," I said softly, looking back up at him. "Just the parts that don't serve me anymore." His eyes flickered with something like understanding. He nodded slowly, drumming his fingers on the notebook. "That's a good answer," he said. "Most people hold on too long." "Yeah," I said, my voice quieter now. "I used to be one of those people." His gaze stayed on me a little longer than expected, like he was reading between the lines. He didn't push, didn't pry, and somehow that made me feel more comfortable than I'd felt in months. "Mind if I write that down?" he asked, tapping his pen against the notebook. "Write what down?" "What you said. Just the parts that don't serve me anymore." "That's good." He flipped open his notebook, revealing pages filled with small, neat handwriting, little scribbles in the margins, circled phrases, and underlined words. He glanced up at me, waiting for permission. I shrugged, feeling an odd sense of pride. "Sure. Go ahead." He grinned, jotting it down, his pen moving quickly across the page. "See? I knew you had something worth writing about." We sat there for the next hour talking about nothing and everything. He told me he was a freelance writer, always looking for inspiration in random places. Coffee shops, parks, train stations. "People are walking stories," he'd said. "Most of them don't even know it." I told him about my work at the marketing firm, how I'd been thinking about switching jobs but hadn't decided yet. I didn't tell him about Ethan, though. That was a story I wasn't ready to share, not yet. By the time he left, I realized something strange had happened. I hadn't thought about Ethan once. Not while I was laughing at Jake's terrible impression of his old boss. Not while I was scribbling random ideas into the corner of his notebook at his request. Not even when he waved goodbye and said, "Hope to see you around, Rebecca." I didn't think of Ethan at all. That was the moment I knew I was healing. Months passed and life moved forward in the quiet, unassuming way it always does. I got a promotion at work, something I'd been too distracted to push for when I was still tangled up in Ethan's lies. My boss told me I'd been more focused than ever lately, and I almost laughed. I hadn't been focused. I just stopped wasting my energy on people who didn't deserve it. The divorce papers were finally signed. Ethan didn't even fight it. Maybe he thought if he stayed quiet I'd change my mind. But I didn't. He sent one last text. "I'm sorry. I hope you're okay." I didn't respond. What was there to say? I'd already made peace with it. I didn't hear from him after that. I didn't check his social media. I didn't ask mutual friends about him. He became a ghost. A name I used to say out loud. A face that blurred more and more with every passing day. One evening I found myself back at that same coffee shop. It had become my spot. A place where I could sit, sip my vanilla latte, and watch the world move by. People still walked past the window. New faces, new stories, but the rhythm was the same. This time, though, I wasn't just watching. I had my own notebook now, a small leather-bound one with smooth cream-colored pages. I flipped it open, chewing the end of my pen as I tried to think of the next line for the story I'd started. I wasn't sure if it would be a short story or a novel, but it felt good to create something from scratch. Writing something good? The familiar voice made me glance up. Jake was standing there, his hands in his jacket pockets, that same grin on his face. "Trying to," I said, tapping my pen against the page. "Not sure if it's good yet." "Well, you've already got a better start than most people," he said, nodding toward my notebook. "Most people just think about writing. You're actually doing it." "Yeah, well, I'm done with thinking about it," I said, giving him a small smile. "Time to do things for real." His eyes flickered with recognition, like he knew what I really meant. He tilted his head toward the chair. "Mind if I sit?" I gestured toward it. "Be my guest." He sat down, pulled out his own notebook, and for a while we just wrote in silence. The world moved on outside, rain streaking the windows like tiny silver rivers. This time I wasn't watching it pass me by. I was in it, living it, one page at a time. Days turned into weeks and weeks slipped into months. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something, waiting for him to come home, waiting for him to change, waiting for my own life to feel like it belonged to me. I'd taken back control, and every little victory felt like proof that I'd made the right decision. I found myself doing things I'd forgotten I loved. On Saturday mornings I'd wake up early, make a big breakfast just for myself, and eat it slowly while watching the sunlight stretch across the kitchen floor.
No rushing. No guilt.
No, what do you want to eat, babe? Followed by his half-hearted, I'm not hungry, just coffee. It was quiet now, but it was a peaceful kind of quiet. The kind you could breathe in. One Saturday, I went to the local farmer's market. It wasn't something I'd done in years. Ethan hated crowds and said outdoor markets were overrated. I used to agree, but now as I wandered through rows of fresh produce, colorful flowers, and homemade bread that filled the air with the scent of warmth, I realized I'd missed this. I missed being part of something. I bought more than I needed. Fresh strawberries, sunflowers, and a loaf of sourdough bread that was still warm to the touch. Carrying it all home in my tote bag, I felt like I was in one of those slow, dreamy montages from a movie, the kind where everything feels simple and full of possibility. When I got home, I put the flowers in a vase on the kitchen table. I stood there for a moment, just looking at them, letting the golden petals brighten up the whole room. It hit me then, the strangest realization. I hadn't bought fresh flowers in years. Not once while I was with Ethan. I'd always told myself I didn't need them. I told myself it was silly to spend money on something that would wilt in a week. But now, standing there in the quiet glow of the kitchen, I realized I'd just been waiting for him to buy them for me. But he never did. I bought these ones for myself. A few weeks later, Jake and I ran into each other again at the coffee shop. By then it wasn't really a surprise. He was a regular now, just like me. We'd fall into easy conversations, sometimes about writing, sometimes about life. He told me about his sister who lived in Chicago, and how she always nagged him to move closer to family. I told him about Kayla and how she'd become my unofficial therapist, even though she claimed she sucked at feelings. Do you ever think about moving? I asked him one day as we sat by the window. It was raining again, big heavy drops hitting the glass like little fists. Nah, he said, tapping his pen against the page of his notebook. I like it here. Too many memories back home. Here it feels like I can breathe. He glanced at me then, his eyes steady on mine, and I felt something shift in the air. You know what I mean? I did. I knew exactly what he meant. That day he asked if I wanted to grab dinner sometime. Nothing fancy, he said, like he was afraid I'd think it was a date. Just two writers who like good food. Writers who like good food, I repeated, pretending to think it over, a smile tugging at my lips. I guess I could be one of those. Is that a yes? He asked, tilting his head like a curious dog. It's a yes, I said, and I didn't even hesitate. The dinner was casual, just like he promised. No pressure, no awkward silences. We went to a little Italian place tucked between a bookstore and a florist. It was one of those places that smelled like garlic and fresh basil the moment you walked in, where the walls were covered in old black and white photos of people who looked like they'd been laughing for decades. Jake told me about the first story he ever wrote, a mystery about a missing cat that turned out to be hiding under the neighbor's porch. He'd been 10 years old, and his mom still had the original pages tucked away in a scrapbook. I thought it was a masterpiece, he said, laughing as he twirled spaghetti around his fork. My mom kept telling me I was a genius, and I believed her. Well, moms are supposed to think that, I teased. But I'd read it. Sounds like it had potential. He grinned at me like I just made his whole week. I might do a sequel. Return of the Cat. This time, maybe it joins a street gang. I laughed so hard I had to put my fork down. I hadn't laughed like that, really truly laughed, in a long time. All right, Rebecca, he said, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing playfully. Your turn. What was the first story you ever wrote? Oh no, I groaned, shaking my head. We are not talking about that. Come on, he urged, grinning like a kid.
No judgment.
I just told you about the case of the porch cat. It's only fair. I sighed, covering my face with my hands.
Ok, fine.
I was 8, and I wrote this horrible love story about a girl who falls in love with her neighbor's older brother. Classic setup, he said, nodding like a professor analyzing great literature. Go on. Her name was Crystal, I said, already cringing. And she would stand at her window, watching him mow the lawn. It was the peak of romantic tension. I think she even wrote him a secret love letter. Jake burst out laughing, clapping his hands together. A love letter? Oh, that's gold. Please tell me he found it. He did. I admitted, my face burning with embarrassment. But here's the twist. He thought it was from his actual girlfriend, and they ended up getting back together because of it. Jake stared at me, stunned, and then leaned back in his chair, pointing at me like I just told him the ending to the best movie he'd ever seen. You were 8 years old and you were already writing plot twists? Rebecca, that's legendary. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't stop smiling. Legendary cringe, maybe? No, he said, still grinning. Legendary storytelling. The waitress came by to drop off the check, but neither of us reached for it right away. We just sat there, the soft glow of the restaurant's lights making everything feel warmer, closer. You know, Jake said, his voice quieter now, more thoughtful. I think you should start writing again. Not just here in the notebook. For real. I am writing, I said, tilting my head. You've seen me at the coffee shop. Yeah, but I mean for real, he said, leaning forward. Submit something. Finish that story you're always scribbling in your notebook. People would read it. His words stayed with me long after dinner. That night, as I sat by the window of my new apartment, a cozy one-bedroom with hardwood floors I picked out for myself, I opened my notebook and stared at the half-finished story I'd been working on for weeks. It was a story about a woman who finds herself after losing everything she thought she needed. I sat there, pen in hand, heart steady, mind clear. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't doubt myself. I didn't question whether the story was good enough or if people would like it. I didn't think about Ethan or the life I'd left behind. I just wrote. Page after page, I poured it all out, the heartbreak, the healing, the hope. Every part of it, raw and real. I wrote until my fingers ached and my eyes grew heavy. But I didn't stop. Not this time. By sunrise, I had the first draft of something that wasn't just a story. It was proof. Proof that I'd survived. Proof that I'd grown. Proof that I could start again, no matter how many times I'd been broken. I closed the notebook, set it aside, and crawled into bed with a full heart and an empty mind. I didn't dream of Ethan that night. I didn't dream of him at all. Instead, I dreamed of everything waiting for me on the other side of this new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The days that followed were quiet but full in a way that felt different from before. Every morning I woke up with a sense of purpose, not because I had to be somewhere or do something for someone else, but because I wanted to. There was a difference, and I felt it with every breath I took. I started to keep a small routine. Wake up at 7 a.m. Make coffee. Water the sunflowers I now bought for myself every week. Sit by the window and write for an hour before work. It was simple, but it was mine. No one to rush me, no one to make me feel like I was wasting time. My story grew little by little. At first, it was just a string of disconnected scenes, small flashes of emotion I couldn't quite string together. But as the days passed, something changed. The character I was writing, the woman at the center of it all, started to feel familiar. She wasn't me, not exactly, but she carried pieces of me with her. Her doubts, her fears, her small, quiet victories. I poured every lesson I'd learned into her, and slowly she came to life. At work, I was more focused than I'd ever been. It wasn't because I loved my job, truthfully, it was still just a paycheck, but because I'd finally stopped letting it drain me. I used to bring my stress home with me, replaying every mistake, every missed deadline, every comment from my boss that I couldn't shake off. But now I left it at the door. I'd spent too much time carrying burdens that weren't mine to carry, and I was done with that. Even Kayla noticed. You seem lighter, she said one night as we sat on her couch, eating takeout straight from the cartons. She was watching some reality dating show, her eyes glued to the screen, but she kept glancing at me like she was trying to figure out a puzzle. Lighter. I echoed, tilting my head. Yeah, she said, pointing a chopstick at me. Like you dropped something heavy and finally started walking upright again. She narrowed her eyes, her mouth pulling into a knowing grin. Don't tell me you're seeing someone. I laughed, rolling my eyes. No, Kayla, I'm not seeing anyone. She said, still grinning like she didn't believe me. Well, you're glowing. That's usually either love or a really good skincare routine. And I know for a fact you don't exfoliate enough. First of all, rude, I said, throwing a pillow at her. She ducked, laughing. Second of all, maybe I'm just happy. Her smile faltered for a second, and she looked at me the way only a sister can, like she was looking past all my words straight into me. You are, aren't you? She said softly. You're happy. I didn't say anything right away, but I nodded. I didn't have to explain it. She knew. The story I'd been writing was almost finished. I couldn't believe it. I was finishing something I'd started. I'd always been good at beginnings, new jobs, new projects, new relationships. But endings? I was terrible at endings. I held on too long. I dragged things out, hoping for a better conclusion than the one I saw coming. But this time I wasn't afraid to end it. I stayed up late one Friday night typing away on my laptop. My fingers moved on their own like the story had been inside me all along, just waiting for me to be brave enough to let it out. By 2 a.m. I was exhausted but too wired to sleep. I stared at the final sentence on the screen, rereading it a dozen times. The last line was simple, but it was everything I wanted it to be. She didn't need to be saved. She'd saved herself. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. It felt like letting out a breath I'd been holding for years. That night, I dreamed of clear skies and open roads.
No faces. No voices.
Just endless space and the feeling of moving forward. I didn't tell Jake I'd finished the story. Not at first. Part of me wanted to hold it close, keep it for myself. But one afternoon at the coffee shop, he caught me staring at my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keys but not typing. You're done, aren't you? He asked, taking a sip of his black coffee. I blinked at him, caught off guard. How do you know? He shrugged, his eyes crinkling at the edges as he smiled. You've got that look people get when they finish something big. Half pride, half terror. I laughed, shaking my head. Yeah, something like that. Let me read it, he said, his voice casual but his eyes serious. I'm not asking to critique it. I just want to see it. I hesitated, my fingers tapping against the edge of the table. Felt too personal, like handing someone my diary. But Jake had never pushed me, never made me feel like I had to be anything but honest. All right, I said slowly, turning the laptop toward him. But if you hate it, lie to me. He grinned. Deal. I watched as his eyes scanned the page, his brow furrowing in concentration. I tried to read his face, searching for signs, a smile, a frown, anything. But he was impossible to read. Minutes passed. Then more. The hum of the coffee shop buzzed around us, but I couldn't hear it. My whole world had narrowed down to the way his eyes moved across the screen. When he finally looked up, he didn't say anything right away. He just sat there, staring at me with this look I couldn't quite place. Well, I asked, my heart thudding in my chest. Is it terrible? No, he said softly, his voice almost reverent. It's not terrible. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his hands folded under his chin. Rebecca, it's beautiful. I felt something hot behind my eyes, a familiar burn that I hadn't felt in months. Tears. But this time they weren't tears of pain. Don't say that just to be nice, I said, swallowing hard, forcing a laugh. Do I seem like the kind of guy who'd lie to you? He asked, tilting his head. That story, it's everything. It's raw and honest and real. People need that. People need you to tell it. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever talked about me like that before. Like I had something to offer that was more than patience, more than kindness, more than just being there. Jake leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. You should submit it somewhere. The thought terrified me. What if they hate it? Then they hate it, he said with a shrug. But that doesn't make it any less yours. Besides, what if they love it? His words settled over me like a warm coat on a cold day. What if they love it? It took 2 weeks of overthinking, rereading and second-guessing every paragraph before I finally hit submit. I sent the story to 3 literary journals. Just for the experience, I told myself. just to see what happens. I didn't expect anything. But 2 months later I got an email. The subject line read, "Congratulations. Your story has been accepted." I stared at it for a full minute, my brain struggling to process the words. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I read the email twice, then a third time. They wanted to publish it. My story. My words. I ran straight to Kayla's house, burst through the door, and held up my phone like I just found the cure for sadness. They accepted it. I shouted, breathless, my cheeks hurting from how wide I was smiling. "Kayla, they're publishing it." Kayla screamed so loud she scared her cat off the couch. She grabbed me, spinning me in circles like we were kids again. "I knew it," she shouted, grinning so big I thought her face might break. "I told you. I told you." That night, we drank cheap wine and danced in her living room. For once, I wasn't looking back at the past. I was looking ahead. Because for the first time in a long, long time, I finally believed it. I was free. I was strong. And I was enough. The night of the publication release felt surreal. I sat at my kitchen table, phone in hand, refreshing the website where my story had been published. My heart was racing with the kind of nervous energy I hadn't felt since high school exams. The story was live. Out there in the world. People I didn't know were reading it right now. I should have felt proud. I should have been celebrating. But instead I was gripped by fear. What if they hated it? What if people thought it was stupid or cliché or poorly written? What if they saw right through it, saw the cracks in my confidence, saw that I was just a woman trying to piece herself back together? The self-doubt was loud. Louder than I expected. But I'd learned something about doubt in the past year. It didn't have to win. Could be loud, it could scream in my ears, but I didn't have to listen to it. I took a deep breath and clicked on the link. There it was. My story. My name. Rebecca Hartley. Right there in bold letters at the top of the page. I stared at it for so long I forgot to blink. Seeing my name like that felt different. Felt real. Like all the hours I'd spent scribbling in notebooks and typing late into the night had finally added up to something tangible. I scrolled down to the comments section, my heart thudding with every inch of movement. The first comment stopped me in my tracks. "This story wrecked me. I don't know who Rebecca Hartley is, but I'm going to remember her name." I covered my mouth with my hand, tears blurring my vision. I scrolled further. I saw myself in this. It's like she took all my feelings and put them into words. This is the kind of story you read and feel like you just had a conversation with an old friend. Raw, real, unforgettable. There were more. Each one like a little light flickering inside me. I wasn't invisible. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every person who saw themselves in it. Every person who had ever been broken. Every person who had ever put themselves back together piece by piece. I sat back in my chair, wiping tears from my cheeks with the sleeves of my sweatshirt. I wasn't just happy. I was whole. The next morning, I woke up to more notifications than I'd ever seen in my life. My phone was buzzing like it was having a seizure. Messages from Kayla, from old friends, even from people I hadn't spoken to in years. "Saw your story, Becca. It's amazing. You did it, girl. I'm so proud of you. Holy crap." I read this and didn't even realize it was you until I saw the byline. "You're incredible." One message, however, made me freeze. It was from him. Ethan. His name sat there on my screen like a ghost that had wandered in from another life. For a moment I didn't move. I just stared at it, my heart caught between disbelief and annoyance. What does he want? I knew I didn't have to open it. I didn't know him anything. But curiosity has a way of getting under your skin, so I tapped on it. "Hey, I read your story." That was it.
No epalegi. No explanaschen.
Just those 5 words. I stared at the message, feeling a swirl of emotions I didn't expect. I thought I'd feel anger or bitterness. But I didn't. All I felt was nothing. He read it. So what? He could read every word of it 1,000 times and it wouldn't change a thing. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his praise. I didn't need him. For the first time I didn't feel the urge to reply. I didn't need to. I put my phone down, poured myself a cup of coffee, and watched the sunrise from my kitchen window. It was quiet, warm, and golden. A new day. I didn't check my phone again. A week later, I got an email from an editor at a publishing house. First I thought it was spam. I almost deleted it until I saw the subject line. We loved your story and want to discuss a potential book deal. I froze. My heart stopped, then restarted in double time. I read the email 3 times, my eyes moving so fast I thought I might miss something. But the words didn't change. Potential book deal. I stood up from the kitchen table so fast my chair scraped against the floor. My hands were shaking, and I didn't know if I should scream or laugh or call someone. I did all 3 at once. I grabbed my phone, called Kayla, and before she could even say hello, I was shouting, "They want a book deal," I said, pacing back and forth in the kitchen. "Kayla, they want to turn my story into a book." "What?" She screamed so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Oh my God, Rebecca. You're not joking, are you? Tell me you're not joking." "I'm not joking," I said, laughing so hard I had to hold my stomach. "I'm not joking, Kayla. It's real." We both screamed at the same time. 2 grown women acting like kids who just found out they'd won front row tickets to a concert. I didn't care how ridiculous it was. "I'd earned this." "You better frame that email," she said, her voice still breathless from screaming. "Print it out. Hang it on your wall. I want it next to your sunflowers." I laughed again, shaking my head. I might just do that. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. I had meetings with editors, phone calls with literary agents, and a crash course on how publishing worked. I learned new terms like advance and royalties, and every conversation left me feeling a little more like I was living in someone else's dream. Jake was the first person I told after Kayla. I met him at the coffee shop, our usual table by the window. He raised his eyebrows as soon as he saw me. "You look suspiciously happy," he said, sipping his coffee. "Something I should know about?" I sat down, biting my lip to hold back my grin. "I got a book deal." Jake's eyes went wide. "Shut up. I'm serious," I said, nodding so hard I thought my head might fall off. "I got a book deal." He stared at me like I just told him I'd won the lottery. Then, without warning, he stood up and threw his hands in the air like he was announcing it to the whole cafe. "HY everybody," he called out, grinning from ear to ear. "This woman right here just got a book deal." Heads turned. People clapped. I covered my face with my hands, laughing so hard I could barely breathe. "Jake, stop," I groaned, still laughing. "Not a chance," he said, sitting back down and giving me the kind of smile that felt like sunlight after a storm. "This is your moment, Rebecca. Own it." And I did. For once I let myself have it. The pride, the joy, the feeling of being seen for something I created. I wasn't the girl who doubted herself anymore. I wasn't the woman waiting on love that didn't love her back. I was the woman who bought her own flowers. The woman who wrote her own stories. The woman who didn't need to be saved because she had already saved herself. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, watching the city lights blink in the distance. I thought about everything I'd been through, everything I'd left behind. It didn't hurt anymore. It didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a chapter I'd finished. I picked up my notebook, opened it to a blank page, and wrote the first line of my next story. She was done waiting for her life to start, so she started it herself. I smiled, knowing this time I wouldn't just write it. I would live it. The day my book hit the shelves was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I stood outside the bookstore for a moment, just staring at the glass window where my name, was printed on a small poster. Right there, beneath the words "New Release Spotlight," was my book. A real book. Not a file on my laptop. Not a half-finished idea scribbled in a notebook. A physical, hold-it-in-your-hands, page-flipping, spine-cracking, honest-to-God book. I stood there frozen, hands in the pockets of my coat, my breath fogging up the glass as I just stared. People walked past me on the sidewalk. Cars honked in the distance, and life moved on around me like it always did. But I didn't move. I couldn't. It felt like if I blinked, the whole thing might disappear. "Are you gonna go in or just admire it from out here?" I turned to see Kayla grinning at me, hands on her hips, her breath coming out in little puffs of cold air. She tilted her head toward the door. "Come on, superstar. Your adoring fans are waiting." I laughed, shaking my head as I followed her inside. The smell of books hit me immediately, paper, ink, a faint hint of coffee from the cafe in the corner. It was the kind of smell that always made me feel calm, like I'd stepped into a place where everything was possible. But this time I wasn't just a visitor. I was part of it. Kayla grabbed my arm, practically dragging me toward the display near the front of the store. And there it was. My book sitting in a neat stack, the cover shining under the soft overhead lights. My chest tightened as I reached out and ran my fingers over the smooth, glossy surface. "Take one," Kayla said, nudging me with her elbow. "You earned it." I picked up a copy, my fingers brushing over my own name on the cover. Rebecca Hartley. It looked so official, like it belonged there. I flipped it open, skimming past the title page, the copyright info, until I reached the dedication. For every woman who was told she wasn't enough, but decided to be more anyway. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I'd written those words months ago, but seeing them in print, knowing that people I'd never met would read them, hit me harder than I expected. My vision blurred and I blinked hard, trying to keep it together. "You're crying," Kayla said, her voice soft but teasing. "I'm not," I said, wiping at my eyes. "It's allergies. Book allergies." Sure, she said, grinning as she pulled out her phone. "Hold it up. I need a picture of this moment for the archives." I held up the book, still grinning like an idiot, and Kayla snapped a few shots. "All right, that's going on every platform I have," she said, her fingers flying over her phone screen. "Instagram, Twitter, everything. The world needs to know my sister is a published author." I rolled my eyes, but I didn't stop her. Part of me wanted to be humble about it, to stay quiet, to act like it wasn't a big deal. But the other part of me, the part that fought for every word on those pages, the part that stayed up until 2 a.m. rewriting scenes until they felt just right, that part of me knew it was okay to be proud. "Hey," a voice said behind me. "Is this yours?" I turned around and saw a woman holding one of the books from the display. She was maybe in her early 30s, wearing a soft brown coat and a knit beanie. Her eyes flicked between me and the cover. "Yeah," I said, my heart doing that strange, nervous flutter. "It's mine." She blinked, a smile slowly forming on her face. "I thought so. I just read the first few pages, and I had to stop because I knew I was buying it." She held the book up, shaking it lightly. This is good. Like really good." I felt like I might float right off the ground. "Thank you," I said, my voice cracking just a little. "That means a lot." "No, seriously," she said, clutching the book to her chest. "I've been in a funk lately, and something about this. It's like you're telling my story. Like you get it." She glanced at the dedication page, her eyes softening. "This right here? This is exactly what I needed today." I didn't know what to say. Words had always come easy to me when I was writing, but in that moment every single word in the English language left me. I nodded, smiled, and hoped she could see how much that meant to me. "Thank you," I said again, and this time it was more than just words. She smiled back, gave me a little wave, and walked toward the register with my book in her hands. I watched her go, and for a second I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not pride. Not happiness. It was peace. The weeks after the release were a whirlwind. Reviews started coming in. Some good, some critical, but I read every single one. I didn't shy away from it the way I thought I would. I told myself I'd only read the good ones, and avoid the bad, but that's not how it works. Every review, every comment, every small note someone left online became part of the experience. Some of them hit me hard. Words like predictable and too familiar made me question everything. But then I'd see the other reviews. The ones from women who said they'd stayed up all night reading it, who said they cried on page 238, who said, "This is the first book I've read that made me feel seen." Those were the ones I held on to. Jake sent me a message the night after the first review went live. It was short, but it stuck with me. "Told you people would love it. Now write the next one." I smiled so hard I almost dropped my phone. Months later, on a rainy afternoon, I found myself sitting at that same little coffee shop. The window fogged up as I watched the rain fall in heavy sheets, turning the city streets into mirrors. I had my laptop open, fingers hovering over the keyboard. A blank document stared back at me. It didn't feel like pressure this time. Felt like possibility. I leaned back in my chair, glancing around the cafe. It was the same as it had always been. Students with their textbooks open, writers with their headphones in, couples talking softly over steaming mugs of tea. It was ordinary. Beautifully, wonderfully ordinary. Jake walked in, shaking the rain from his jacket. His hair was soaked, droplets of water sliding down his face, but he didn't seem to care. He spotted me immediately, grinning as he made his way over. "Didn't think you'd be here today," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thought you'd be too famous for small-town cafes now." I snorted, rolling my eyes. "I'll never be too famous for a good latte." He raised an eyebrow, glancing at my laptop screen. "New story?" "Yeah," I said, tapping the keys once, letting the blinking cursor move forward. "Just starting." "Got a title?" he asked, leaning forward, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Not yet," I admitted. "But I'll figure it out." He nodded like he already knew I would. He pulled out his own notebook, flipping it open to a fresh page. "Well, when you do, I get to be the first to know." "Deal," I said, smiling. And just like that, we both got to work. Rain tapped softly against the window, the world outside a blur of gray and silver. Inside, the soft clatter of typing keys and scribbling pens filled the air. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was perfect. I glanced at the blank page again, took a breath and started to write. This time I wasn't afraid. This time I knew exactly where the story was going. Because this time I was in control. The rain outside had slowed to a gentle drizzle, soft taps against the fogged-up window. The world beyond it was quiet, hazy and distant, like a painting left out in the rain. Inside, the warmth of the coffee shop wrapped around me, the soft hum of conversations blending with the clinking of cups and the low buzz of the espresso machine. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and for a moment, I just watched the blinking cursor. It didn't feel like an enemy anymore. Felt like an invitation. No more second-guessing. No more wondering if I was good enough to tell a story. I'd done it once. I could do it again. My mind drifted to everything that had led me here. The long nights of doubt, the heartbreak that had almost swallowed me whole, the moments when I thought I'd never feel like myself again. But I wasn't that woman anymore. She'd been cracked, yes, but not broken. Just like pottery that's mended with gold, every fracture had been filled with something stronger. I smiled to myself, tapping out the first line of the new story. She didn't see the storm coming, but she learned how to dance in the rain. I sat back, staring at the words. Simple. True. And somehow it felt like a beginning worth chasing. Across the table, Jake glanced up from his notebook, his eyes flicking toward my screen. His brow lifted in that curious, playful way he had, like he was always 1 second away from making a joke. "That's a hell of a first line," he said, leaning forward to get a better look. "Bold move. You setting the tone right out the gate." "Huh. Always," I replied, smirking as I kept typing. "Love that for you," he said with a grin before going back to his own writing. The rain outside softened even more, turning into a misty curtain of silver. I glanced out at it, watching a woman in a yellow raincoat walk slowly along the sidewalk, her hands tucked into her pockets, head tilted up toward the sky like she wasn't afraid of getting wet. I watched her until she disappeared around the corner. I didn't know where she was going, and maybe she didn't either. But she was moving forward.
No umbrelle. No rush.
Just walking. I leaned forward, fingers back on the keyboard, and kept going. The words poured out more easily this time.
No hesitaschen.
No fear. Because for the first time I realized that everything I'd been searching for, the strength, the peace, the sense of self I thought I'd lost, had been with me all along. I just had to stop waiting for someone else to show it to me. I had to choose me. And I did. I chose to walk away. I chose to start over. I chose to write my own story on my own terms, one word at a time. Outside, the rain stopped. The clouds broke apart, and for the first time that day, sunlight spilled through, hitting the window in long golden streaks. It caught on the glass, turning the foggy smudges into glowing patterns of light. I glanced at Jake. He was still focused on his notebook, chewing on the end of his pen as he frowned at whatever scene he was working through. I smiled softly, letting myself appreciate the moment for what it was. Peace. Not the loud kind, with music blaring and fireworks in the sky. No, this peace was quieter, steady, rooted. The kind of peace that didn't depend on anyone else. The kind you build for yourself one day, one choice at a time. I looked down at the screen. My story was waiting for me. Not someone else's story. Not the one I thought I was supposed to live. Mine. I kept typing, the sound of the keys filling the air, soft but steady. This time I wasn't writing to prove anything. I was writing because I finally understood something I hadn't before. I am the author of my own life. No one else. Not him. Not anyone. Just me. And that was more than enough. The end.